Welcome back to Digging Deeper, YEG's Development Chat, brought to you by Clarity Development Advisory. I'm Dave Onashenko.
I'm Ryan Eidick.
And we have a special guest today. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Ryan Eidick. I'm an urban planner, just like the two guys sitting on either side of me here. I teach in the planning department at the U of A and the environmental planning course. I'm a member of IDEA. I run their podcast. So, I don't idle very often. So I'm very excited to be here. Thanks, guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you have your own planning outfit as well.
That's
Eins
right.
Consulting or
Yep.
Eins Planning? What do you...
We go with Eins Consulting.
Yeah.
Limited if you want to get really legal about it. So, yeah, it's Eins Consulting.
Yeah. What's your business number? Do we need to...
Yeah. I actually don't have it memorized. I think it starts with a 2, but that's all I really know.
I have to look mine up all the time as well, so that's fine.
Yeah, Eins Development Consulting is what it's officially called.
Sweet.
Fantastic. Good. So speaking of planning, we are planners, we're APPI members, and we are going to geek out about planning. So often on this chat, we talk about development, we talk about the happenings of development and planning in the city. We're going to focus in on planning specifically today, and that is the Zoning Bylaw Renewal Initiative draft. So why don't you set us up a bit for that, Raynon? What does that mean? Where have we been? What to your layperson who's watching? What does that even mean?
Well, then we got to start with what is zoning. I think everybody watching probably has a good sense of that, though. But
How would you do? Actually, that's a good question. So let me put it to you, Ryan, because you are Professor Ryan to some of the students in the class you teach at the U of A. So how do you describe zoning to the layperson when your family members ask or something? What is it that you do and you're trying to describe it? What is it to you?
Yeah, great question. It depends on who I'm talking to. So there are, in a lot of ways, restrictions on what you're able to do on a given piece of private property. So zoning typically only applies to private property, in some ways public property, parks and schools and that type of thing, but generally it's about private property. And basically it just sets out the guidelines of what you're able to do. So how far away from property lines you're allowed to be, how tall you're allowed to be, what kinds of things you can build there, what the building can look like generally. So it's basically just a regulatory tool to determine what and how and what it looks like.
And who makes those decisions?
Municipalities make those decisions. So people like us, just on the other side of the argument, I suppose.
And these are things that are statutory, so they're baked in effectively laws within the municipality, and they differ between municipalities. The zoning that exists in the City of Edmonton is different than, adjacent next door in Leduc, adjacent down in Calgary, in Toronto, anywhere else. So they are all specific to their jurisdiction, if you will, right?
I find there's some copycatting for sure, especially in the metropolitan region, right? Like you'll see a lot of similar things baked into all the municipalities here, but even Edmonton and Calgary is a little bit the same. We'll talk about that, I'm sure.
Sure.
But, you're absolutely right. It is specific to the jurisdiction.
So what is happening right now then? What are we talking about? Where have we been? What is this change?
Great place to start. So zoning bylaw renewal is underway. The City of Edmonton is basically sticking their hands right into the existing zoning bylaw, which has been kind of a bit of a Frankenstein, if I can put it that way. Like it started, I don't even know when they first enacted this. I don't know if you guys know, but...
The latest version?
Yeah.
I want to say early 2000s, late 90s?
2001, something like
2001.
that. Yeah, exactly.
And since that point in time, like the number of zones has expanded. What people are trying to do has kind of changed a little bit. Our urban context, our municipal development plan, that's all changed as well. And so we're at this point in time, this sort of inflection point where we're trying to do different things, but our current bylaw doesn't necessarily fit that. So the city's undertaking this massive exercise, which is to rewrite the entire thing, to update the entire citywide map of zones. And so we hear this all the time now in these conversations. The city currently has 46 standard zones, I think that's right, and then 17 of those are residential or something like that, and they're trying to drop that to 23.
I thought it was substantially more. I thought it was 70-something.
70-something? I don't know. A lot of zones.
You can look it up. If you're watching right now, give us the comments.
I'm not an encyclopedia. But anyways, the whole thing is we're trying to make this simpler. We're trying to make a zoning bylaw that fits the needs of the city that we're trying to build now, fits the needs of developers and communities, which is a really complicated thing to try to do.
Absolutely.
And so we're halfway through this process, right? We're looking at adoption, I think, early 2024 if things go according to plan, and a massive change to some of the particular types of zoning. So right now we're kind of split into residential, commercial, industrial, institutional, those types of broader categories, and that might be changing a little bit.
So what I've heard you say then, and Ryan, why don't you weigh in on this? It sounds like, three different things. So this happens all the time. It is this, they revisiting it, but it's a simplification of what has kind of grown with stuff is tacked on. Frankenstein's the word you used. It's providing clarity for your individual. We love that word. It comes up all the time.
For you use it a few times,
Yeah.
How do
Providing
you
clarity.
use Eins in that?
It doesn't roll off the tongue in conversation very
So
often.
simplification, clarity, and the last is kind of that foresight for, where we are now and where we're headed. In terms of development patterns, where the city under the new city plan, which we've talked a bit about. So I think that's great. So we have a couple talking points we're going to get into. I forgot to say off the top, if you're watching live with us, please, if you've got comments, questions, any feedback, put them up in the chat. We love the interactive nature of this. If you're watching this after the fact, put the comments on. We'll respond to it later, and even maybe on the next time we do one of our chats here. But we love the back and forth. And
and this being more policy oriented, if you're not sure what we're talking about, tell us. We're all kind of urban planning nerds in this room, and so it might not make sense. And just let us know. We'll explain better if we can.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of the timelines of this, because someone who doesn't know what's going on, there's been some pretty good engagement. It's easy to get lost in life and everything else here, in your city life, that, you might miss some of these engagement prompts, but there's been significant engagement with people, with community leagues, with stakeholders, developers, social agencies, everything. And it started in 2018. And that was their research phase, was kind of phase 1 up until 2021. And right now we're in the build phase, where they're kind of putting that out. There's a framework. They're kind of testing things and then accepting feedback. That's where
tons of engagement at this stage.
So that actually, if you're watching now and you don't know what's up, if you search it right now, Zoning Bylaw Renewal, City of Edmonton, on the city's website, you're
Engaged Edmonton.
Engaged Edmonton. There you go. Prompts for that engagement, both virtual and in person, where you can get involved and give feedback, which is important.
Yeah. I think it's fantastic. I don't know how much you two have interacted with it, but the online platform that they have on Engaged Edmonton, they allow you to put comments directly in it. The only thing I don't like is that it shows your name.
Yes, I agree.
You're definitely tied to whatever you're saying in there.
So you can go through now and see what Ryan Eidick commented.
Well,
and
I go under a pseudonym, as you guys know, so you won't know exactly what I'm saying.
I like that though, because I've got a big problem with comment section of websites. Right? And the difference between accountability and anonymity. And if you can, by putting someone's name on it too, you have a lot less kind of keyboard warriors or whatever offering their, opinion. But if they say, hey, this is Dave Onashenko, and, this is what I like, but this is what I don't like about it.
Well, and moreover, it's more specific to individual policy. Like, it's a very in-depth kind of exercise where you're looking at a page and you're commenting on that page. You're not commenting at the bottom of the forum.
That's right. It's like a Google Doc or whatever.
Yeah,
exactly.
So it's super cool. I know that,
and
the city had to source new software for this and everything. It's novel. So
contextual
awesome.
Comments are good, because the summary comment, you often get one extreme or the other.
There's really no point in that for something like that. You're talking about a several 100-page document of bylaw.
Yes.
Like, how can you just give a broad overview of that? There's a lot of detail built into that that requires a degree of like professional and like residential, everything commentary.
Yeah.
So,
But even just time too, because
Yeah.
it's easy just to say I don't like anything and I'm going to go offer my opinion.
Sure.
That's right.
But you know, you go to a specific page on
Yeah.
this residential zone. Oh, here's some comments about this.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, and it's it allows threads to be created. I've seen a few things on some of the comments that one person comments, a few start replying, so it creates kind of like what you guys are doing here. Create some discussion and some threads around certain topics. So I like it.
It can be ominous though, right? Like we're all interested in this kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
Your average person who has no knowledge of this but just wants to live in a better city, be involved. Where do you even start? Right?
Well,
Like,
that's
how do you-
right. That's exactly it.
So it's challenging.
I feel the city's done a great job with engagement up until this point, though. So it's not
that's
just
true.
this. And I joked about having to attach my name to it. You know, I'm going through and find you recognize names that are commenting on the
I
documents.
recognize almost everybody.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's all the planning dorks like us. But it's all the other engagements that they did. They did their podcast, all the discussion paper stuff that they did originally. They're going directly out to EFCL and community leagues.
Yeah.
There's lots of different opportunities to get involved. So.
And it's that demystification that's important because, you said, Ryan, it can be, it's intimidating,
It's a lot.
really, right?
Yeah.
And if you have no idea, like if I sent this to a family member or someone else who's disconnected, they're like, well, I don't know, right?
Yep.
So
and it's the amalgamation of 23 staffs worth of work, external consultants.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
3
right?
years worth of work.
3
yeah,
years
exactly.
of work, and so we're in phase 2 right now, like you said, the build phase. They're at this stage where they have a draft zoning bylaw, and they've got kind of the know your zone map. I don't know if you can pull that up there. So it kind of shows you, if you search up your property, what zone you'd potentially be in now if this is approved by council. So then you can go back to that zoning bylaw draft, kind of look it up, see what you can develop on your property now, whether that's changed.
exactly.
Super
and,
interesting.
And both, at the residential, but then you're a business owner, you own some industrial property, whatever else, right?
Yeah.
Or you're adjacent to it and you want to know, hey, what can they do over there at this property now?
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start. We got 3 talking points here. Let's start at number 2 here because I think this is a good starting point. So we're talking about the challenges of combining residential zones. And the reason why I want to start here is as we're talking about your layperson in Edmonton, that's what they're going to do. They're going to look and say, hey, here's my house in the middle of Otwell, in the middle of Eau Claire, in the middle of Glenora. What is it? What is it going to be? What changes are there? That's really where 90% of people, that's where their engagement will stop. So let's talk about this. We're shrinking from residential zones like this down to 6 zones is being proposed.
Let's be a little more specific, just to
Sure.
be clear for other people. So, Ron, why don't you tell us what, in terms of residential zones we have today? You work with these every day.
Yeah.
What do we have? What currently exists? What are we working with?
Currently?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a lot.
Yeah.
So there is our RF1 to RF6 would kind of be all of your low density ones, and that means that there's 6 different ones there. And then anything beyond that, your 7s, 8s, and 9s, that is more high density. What they've done is shrunk it down into basically a low density, a transitional, and then a medium density, and then a large site, and then there's still a rural. So there's still a few.
Yep.
But the ones that are kind of relevant to what we do would be kind of 2 maybe 3, right?
Sure.
For the most part.
And that's not even including, so that was your standard. We're talking about the Frankenstein nature of how developed you had your, urban character row house zone, and you've got, a bunch in different areas like Blatchford.
That's
or
right. We
other
spent all
areas.
the
All these
special
small
zones.
lot zones, all sorts.
Yeah,
All
so it's
sorts.
really condensing it, which is, in my opinion, great. Obviously, they're coming for our jobs, right?
To some degree,
To
yeah.
some degree,
Yeah.
the small RF1 to RF3 zonings that I think everyone can agree are very straightforward and very simple and get approved usually very easily.
Yeah.
Those are disappearing, and on the one hand, that's great for council. It's going to shrink and shorten our public hearings a little bit. I like the fact that we're providing more flexibility in these low density zones. But yeah, what did you want to talk about specifically about these residential zones?
So we're talking about the challenge here in doing that shrinking. There's sort of a certain expectation that's given when you start adding all these Frankenstein zones on now.
Yeah.
Here's what you can get through this zone. This is what I'm in today. And now we're saying we're going to do this mass rezoning and put you all kind of in that small residential category. your rights, your development rights might be changing a little bit.
Yeah.
So when you're flipping from RF1 to RF3, in some cases, it's probably maybe beneficial to you from a development perspective. Say you're an RF1 zone property and now you're going to be effectively what is an RF3.
Correct.
Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you wanted to split your lot and maybe you wanted to have kind of, build some skinnies or something like that. But on the flip side, what are some of the challenges? Maybe you can speak to this with like a community in undertaking this change.
So, I hate using this terminology, but lack of certainty. So, when we were doing the RF1 to RF3 rezonings, neighbors would know kind of exactly what you're doing. You're allowed a single family house. Now you're expanding to allow a row house or whatever. And you kind of have to state what you want to do in that zone.
Sure.
Now it's like neighbors on any side of you can build anything within these parameters. So I think, I don't know how this is going to lead, if this is going to lead to more appeals or more public distrust of infill, but it really expands what everyone's able to do, and now you're kind of uncertain what's going to go on next to you.
Well, I mean, we've seen, I guess to counteract that and play devil's advocate a bit, we've seen those development rights expand in RF1 over the years, right? You can do a mid-block, semi-detached with a basement suite and a garden suite in an RF1. One of the only things you can't do is multi-unit housing like row housing, right? In the middle of the block on RF1. So the differences between, say, those two zones are small. They're going to be adding some more things from some of the other zones too.
Yeah.
I would argue, and this is where I love bringing up the market all the time, but I honestly think the market dictates a lot of what gets built in certain areas, more so than the zones themselves. We have some RF1 in some areas that are protectionist, and the council's been quick to say, hey, no, we're going to allow RF3 here because it makes sense because you want to do townhouses on the end. But, for your people in, that have a very large lot in a very affluent area, there's a change in zone where you're adding a couple more of these uses doesn't give allowance all of a sudden, for cheap multifamily housing to get built, because the scale of economics, the market doesn't work that way. There's no one who's going to effectively lose money to buy a $1.5 million lot to tear it down to build cheap market rate housing when that can be done other places more effectively with a lot less headache, right?
So that's not controversial in this room, but what you're saying is in some communities.
For sure.
But I'm saying that what I'm trying to say is that it is more open-ended when you start adding some of these uses or some of the zones together. But as much as it is the zone, it's also the market demand and the market dynamics that determine what gets built where.
Sure.
I wonder, tugging on that thread a little bit, if this might artificially increase land costs, land values. All of a sudden, every single lot can have X number of units on it without having to go through a rezoning process. You've seen, I'm sure, some people are marketing their homes in infill situations that
all
are like
time.
50 by 150 lot, great for 3 units, that kind of thing. Now, all of a sudden, the land can do that without.
So I would argue it's the exact opposite. Because
you're spreading it everywhere.
Well, it's supply and demand. Now your supply is infinite, right? A great example would be corner lots in neighborhoods adjacent to arterials that the city would easily rezone for an RA7. So an RA7 is your medium density, kind of your low-rise apartments, something like that, or even an RA8. And there's certain areas in the city where there has been a ton of these properties come online, or they say, hey, there's potential for this. And you have an owner who has 2-3 houses at the end of this block say, hey, we could sell this. And so, we would help them, we'd connect them with people. But talking to a bunch of brokers, they said, there's dozens, if not hundreds of these sites that keep popping up around the city, and that depresses what the actual, people might have an idea of what they're like, oh, I can get, $100, $150 per square foot. But the reality is the market's saying, no, if I can buy this one or your neighbors or one 4 blocks away, now the price that actually happens is here. And it'll be the same because it might make things easier for your smaller scale infill, for your townhouses and things like that, because they don't have to go through the hurdles of rezoning it. But it's going to be driven by that demand, not the supply constrictions, right? And so people might have an expectation. That's the difference between expectation of what land values are and then what the market's willing to pay.
Right.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah, good point. let's jump to our next point here, which is mixed-use zones. This is something new in Edmonton. We haven't really we've had these, but they haven't been called that to some degree. So your existing kind of commercial CB3 is a great example. What's that called? CB3 high intensity business zone. I don't even remember.
The fact that we don't know what it's
I don't
called
even know. It doesn't get used.
Mixed use business zone.
Mixed use business.
Right.
Yeah.
I
No.
think you're right.
No. Like I think we've had like 2 or 3 developments at this point in time under CB3.
Yeah.
Hasn't been used. I think that speaks to its effectiveness at this point in time, and the city's kind of looking at mixed use zones now being added to the bylaw. So that's, allowing for a variety of different uses, commercial uses, residential, hotels, whatever that may be, on individual sites. So how do you do this now? This is complicated. We haven't really been in this world before. We have like RA9 zoning, for example, which kind of does it. There, again, a couple developments have kind of happened under RA9.
That have had some commercial components.
Some commercial components.
And the question is, where do you allow it? If you say, hey, this is on this commercial strip, we're just going to put it on the corners, is that a high-level kind of planning exercise, but it doesn't make sense on the ground? Why here and not here?
Agreed. So, I mean, they've blanketed it. So the mixed-use zones are basically where the corridors are.
Yeah.
So, and where all the Main Street overlay applied previously. So, my personal opinion, I mean, the mixed-use zone, there's a few things that are actually great about it, but what they've done is just taken commercial zones and called them a mixed-use zone. In my opinion, mixed use should allow way more flexibility. If I want to build just an apartment on this site, I should be allowed to.
Yep.
I shouldn't be compelled to put main floor commercial.
So that speaks to market, like you were talking about. Is there always that market for a mixed-use development?
Exactly.
Or are you saying if you can't build this, you can't build anything now on that site?
Exactly. So a lot of our main streets currently CB1, CB2, CB3, I wish more were zoned that way. But CB1, CB2, very seldom are you seeing that turn into a mixed-use situation, right? Yeah. And I don't think that's going to change. They basically just transported those over. So I hesitate to even use the word mixed use because it's really only allowing, like, if you're building something on the ground floor, it has to be commercial. And that's not mixed use in my opinion, and that's going to sterilize or continue to sterilize a lot of sites in terms of their ability to have residential. They're just not going to have them.
And that, that's great feedback. We hear that from developers all the time too, because it's in an ideal world, planners love to talk about your coffee shops and your pubs and everything else on all your streets you're walking in, residential above. The reality is there's only so much demand for that, right?
That's right.
And, if we had a commercial broker here now, they'd tell you about the glut of commercial property that exists and does in many cities. And so by forcing someone to do that, do they say, this doesn't make sense economically for me to do this? We have a lot of, especially Oliver's a great example. We've dealt with developers in there who said, it makes more sense for us financially and from a market demand if we put townhouse type facing units or residential units on these main floors above and beyond doing commercial. We just don't see as much demand for it. Is it good to have some of that in certain areas? Absolutely.
Yeah, and is that townhouse development on the front a problem? I don't really think so, right? It's a different sort of housing typology built in. It can support other commercial sites in the vicinity. There's advantages to that, and so it speaks to what you're saying where flexibility is key in a mixed-use type zone. Otherwise, it's not really a mixed-use zone. It's a zone that nobody's going to use.
Yeah, I would like to see the mixed use be applied to kind of an area. So, like, 118th Street, we want in between these two streets, we want this to be a mixed-use area. And if you want to build a 6-story residential tower, great. It doesn't have to have commercial on the main floor. If you want to build, a 1-story commercial building, great. In the entire area, it'll all balance out. There's one interesting thing that I wanted to ask you two about.
Yeah.
They've added a minimum ground floor height of 4 meters.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, so your minimum in the mixed-use zone, your minimum ground floor height has to be 4 meters. I've asked a few commercial brokers to see is that like something that tenants are asking about, and the only response I've gotten was maybe restaurants,
so
for
is that
ventilation or whatever.
That's not just a visual appearance of being sort of 4 meters where you kind of wrap in the second floor. It's actually it has to be
Floor to
4
floor,
meters.
4 meters.
Wow.
And the description in the zoning by in like the document that they gave, and they give all the descriptions, which I love, is that it allows for future adaptation towards retail uses if it's not a retail use right off the hop.
That's interesting. I mean, I can see that. And again, this doubles down on what you're saying about the priority for commercial.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does it inhibit some things? Probably. But the height's important. I mean, when we were dealing with one mixed use kind of project recently, and we were looking at how that might fit from a massing perspective, there's feedback from the architect about the importance of the height of those bays for the commercial tenants. And because the higher you have it, the more flexibility you have. Some will say, well, it doesn't work for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they need so many feet of clear. But again, this speaks to the city saying, well, we think this first and foremost should be commercial.
Not really mixed use. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Interesting. Well, I think that's something that we should continue to watch and see how that evolves. And if you have any thoughts on the matter, as we had said, you can go and put them up on the Engaged Edmonton site and offer that feedback.
Mm-hmm.
I'll offer one more comment on that before we pivot to our next question. So in the West Ingle plan, for example, on 124th Street, it's an old plan that was developed, I think, in the 80s, early 90s. And so on the opposite, it was saying, like, here's where commercial can go and here's where it can't go specifically.
Yeah, that's tough.
And so the city has looked at that since and said, well, we've moved past that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was actually the exact opposite perspective. I would say the pendulum swung in terms of perspective, and really we need that flexibility and balance,
That's right.
as we've been saying.
If you want areas to redevelop, maximum flexibility is always good. So, yeah.
Totally. Number 3?
Number 3, so the role of DC or direct control districts moving forward. So for our viewer, what is a direct control zone, right? And how do they operate within the City of Edmonton right now?
Well, they're intended to be zones that are site-specific, so they deal with sort of land uses or configurations of land uses that don't fit within standard zones within the bylaw for a variety of different reasons. Maybe it's a unique idea, maybe the site has difficult characteristics, it can't comply with certain setbacks, or it's like a very prominent type of development. Oftentimes those kind of fit into the DC world, but really it's kind of become this beast.
Yep.
Where there's 1,200 some DC2s right now in Edmonton. So a lot of the focus of zoning bylaw renewal has been, how do we ensure standard zones work so that people don't have to go down the DC route? Because I think until recently, for quite a while, there was this kind of, even if it could have potentially fit within a standard zone, a lot of developers kind of wanted to go the DC route. It gave them a little bit of assurance in terms of built form. There's always conversation with communities who really want to know what's going to be built in their community. If you just say it's RA8, that could be a variety of different things.
Yeah.
So they've kind of served a purpose. There's been criticism whether that's the right approach, and it seems the direction right now is we want to limit the use of DCs and move towards a place where our standard zones work a little bit better. So is this going to work?
Well, I mean, first of all, none of the direct control zones are getting updated.
Good
So
point.
if you're
Yeah.
watching, you own a direct control zone
Yeah.
property,
Important.
whatever's there
Important.
right now is what you're going to have once the new zoning bylaw gets passed. I think we're going to see a lot of these get rezoned to standard zones.
Okay.
In some circumstances, the ones that are unbuilt, there's a lot more flexibility.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to see lots more direct controls. The bigger the blanket you make, so we're shrinking the amount of zones. So, you have to fit into this one specific set of criteria. Like you said, there's always the hardship issue. Not every property is a 50 by 130 lot.
Sure.
Or there's specific circumstances that might merit a DC2. I think we're going to see a lot of these like internal direct control zones for the exact purpose that you're talking about. Like for, we want, and we can talk about modifiers if you want, but I think that's where we're going.
Sure.
Direct controls.
It's interesting because I think you can. There's a whole bunch of different kind of categories you could put how DCs have been used at the city, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one that I think most of us could agree and push back against, the city has pushed back against, it was the speculative landowner who had a site, rezoned it direct control. Let's say a high density multifamily site downtown, right? In the early 2000s, said, hey, now this site, I can get 35 stories. It has to look exactly like this.
FAR 15.
Whatever it is.
Try to sell that.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and they're trying to sell it.
Yeah.
And what these people found often was, because it was so easy to rezone to get these direct control type sites or whatever else, to get development rights, that there really wasn't a lift in value in getting that. So you really just, by putting in a couple $100,000 and a year and a half of time, they didn't get their lift in value. And we saw some external developers from Toronto and stuff try that. They said, well, you can build this on this site now, and therefore it's worth this. And it's like, nah, you didn't get an extra $2 million of value out of this site, right? So that's one that I think that's great if you try to rein in on that. However, as Ryan had just said, I think there's a lot of unique things about the way that development happens. And when you say, hey, we want to do this project and it meets 9 out of 10 objectives of this general zone that it could fit in, but for whatever reason it can't, but everyone else agrees this is great, then we have to make something that works. And my problem with zones, and the zones that we have, generally speaking, and hopefully it's going to be easier, is they're boxes. And if you fit in, you fit in. Mm-hmm. And if not, then you don't. And then you're talking about variance, which leads to appeal and everything else, or maybe not. So how do you make that work? And that direct control can provide those assurances. It can make complicated or projects that are seen as beneficial for whatever reason, give them a path forward, rather than that it doesn't end up in a box that doesn't fit.
I'm curious to know from your opinions what you're typically seeing direct controls, like what types of policies are typically direct controls used for. Like, I'll just answer my own question. How about height, density, floor area ratio are the three things that we see direct controls for all the time.
Yeah.
Because in the zoning bylaw currently, there's not the development officer doesn't have a mechanism to give you a variance for that. That's just being copied and pasted over to the new zoning bylaw. So same thing: height, floor area ratio, and density.
And which, that's still things that can be rezoned maybe in standard zones, but if you want extra allowance, then that's where you're going. I'd say, though, it's even above and beyond that, and this is where I see tremendous value for it. If there's provisions in how development can happen, order of things, extra requirements that have to happen. You talked about, when I was on the IDEA podcast, about our famed Highlands site, right? And so we have a DC in there that gave assurance to the community that if this were ever to be demolished, it gave rights for this kind of strange old commercial building to allow it to operate as commercial. But if it ever gets demolished, it has to be residential. So that you can't do that in a standard zone.
That's right.
But it gave those assurances. Or, excuse me, the bubbly is working. I'm feeling.
Yeah, are we sponsored by bubbly here?
We should be.
Well, we shouldn't say that. They're going to come after us now.
Here's another one, a mixed-use zone, for example, and we got a call about this yesterday, and it was this zone that wanted a residential, this use that wanted a residential component attached to it that wasn't traditional to that, but there's a lot of reasons and ways to assure that it's fine and it makes sense, and they got a lot of thumbs up for it, but there isn't a traditional zone that it fits on.
So sometimes things just haven't been contemplated.
Right.
Nobody's thought, like, maybe somebody wants to do this in the future. And so how do you address those issues other than with a DC?
And there's some municipalities that we've talked to that will say, yeah, we have DCs, but we rarely ever use them. And we say, look, here's a path forward. You see this is valuable, but if you say no, the development's going away and they're going to look for a site maybe outside of your municipality to make it work because it's unique. And they say, no, it doesn't work. Whereas having that adaptability, I think, is important. And being flexible is important. Do we want 1,200 DCs that you have to go through and we're just regulating the color of paint and all this when it could fit in? No, but every site is unique and a project is unique.
I agree.
Well, that's where I was gonna just say, right? Like it's about balance here. like a DC isn't inherently flexible. It's actually the opposite.
Yeah.
It offers flexibility to that individual site
Yeah.
or that landowner, but then it locks that in. That's what you can build.
Yes.
And so we need to find a way that's somewhere in the middle. I don't know what that is. Is it your context modifiers? I don't
Yeah, I don't think so.
I don't
but
think
yeah,
so.
I mean, the city's been getting fairly good about direct controls,
Sure.
providing flexibility. Like we worked on one not too long ago that didn't even require a site plan, which was insane.
Yeah, we've done a couple of
Yeah,
those now.
so previously you had to have like your entire architecture done, submitted. Like council is sitting there nitpicking your window details.
Totally.
But like now they've
Yeah.
gone a little bit further into the flexible range,
Yeah.
which I think is helpful. But what's really the difference between that and the standard zone in a lot of ways? Like,
Yeah.
Well, we will see. I mean, we tell clients often, if you intend to do this, and we're talking about direct control, if you intend to develop this yourself, then here's why it can work.
Yeah.
But if there's anything in you that thinks, no, I'm going to rezone this, and maybe I'm going to sell the property,
don't do it.
Please
do
don't
it.
go
No.
direct
yeah,
control,
because
man.
you're just you're locking up that site for a future purchaser that has
Well,
to
it's
rezone it
it's a
again.
more complex, comprehensive, expensive process too to even
Oh, yeah.
get there. Like
That's right.
you're talking about like more public engagement. You're talking about again a more detailed council review
Yeah.
of what you. Yeah, it's just complicated.
I remember a number of
Yeah.
years ago, the city looked at it internally, and they said how many DC zones are actually rezoning from previous DC zones, as in
Right.
they're just changing the DCs because it had locked them into this, and they need it to change a bit.
Oh, I see
And
that
it
all
was a
the time. It's
surprising
like,
all the
we
time.
need 6 meters
the
more
time.
height now. We got to squeeze an extra floor out to make this work.
Yeah.
It's all the
And
time.
there's no issues with that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, we'll approve it. You just have to go through this different
Yeah.
process to get there. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's tough.
Well, that's why we're here, and this is why we're geeking out about some of this changes to the zoning bylaw. This has been fun. I've enjoyed this so far. We're going to
Yeah.
see where this goes and develops because it's far from done. Like we had said earlier, if you're watching this and you have any interest, get involved. Check out the Engaged Edmonton site. Offer
Yep.
your feedback. Offer your feedback on our chat too. We'd love to hear from
Yeah.
you.
I don't think this is the last time we'll be talking about zoning bylaw renewal. Like there's going to be lots to come as there's new drafts coming out or it's going to council or what have you.
And maybe we should grab someone from the city to chat about
Yeah.
this who's maybe involved in that process
Totally.
too, and they can offer
Yeah.
a bit of feedback. Either way, we could sit here and talk about planning and zoning all day long, but we respect your time as well. And so we're going to wrap this up now. Thanks a lot, Ryan, for coming by.
Yeah.
This has been fun.
Appreciate it.
Totally.
Thanks,
It was
guys.
awesome.
We'll
Yeah.
do it again. Sponsor. Yeah, maybe not Bubbly, but we had YEG Gymnastics sponsor that first podcast. If you are a local business and have any interest in promoting your product, we like coffee, we like beer, we like a lot of things, but we like supporting local
Yeah.
business. If
We'd
you're
love to
watching this-
drink one of your beers and have a good chat, an
Exactly.
extra interesting chat. 'cause
Sounds
we're
like you're trying to
drinking
get
beer.
free stuff.
Yeah, a little bit. That's
A little bit of that,
Yeah.
and a little bit of the plug too. I mean,
Yeah.
we're here plugging Eins Consulting. We'd like to plug, your whatever your brand is as well. Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining us. We'll do this again soon. We'll see you guys in a couple weeks.